Greetings and salutations, everyone. I hope everyone is doing well today. Today I have some terrifying encounters that I'm looking forward to sharing with you and ending our weekend with. Before we get into these encounters, though, a couple links. As you know, I rely on my Patreon, my PayPal, and my merch store to help the channel to continue to grow and go. Those links are in the description below. Also, Dogman Frightening Encounters, Volume 1, 2, and 3. The audiobook version, written by Tom Lyons, narrated and produced by me, Jeffrey Nadolny. They're available on Audible, Amazon, and iTunes. The links to those books are also in the description below. Now, I've taken enough of your time, everyone. Let's get on with today's upload. Shall we? Today's first part of the upload. It was 2 years after our marriage, in 1986, that we purchased an older home on 2.5 acres in northeast part of Ohio. I'm not going to tell you the exact location because we sold the home after what I'm about to say happened. The house was a 2-story home built in 1930s, which had a large dilapidated outbuilding in the back of the property. My wife, being the artist in the family, had already upon first seeing it, decided that she was going to either draw or paint it, or possibly both, thinking it had great appeal. To me, it looked like a haunted house, and I could care less. One day when I came home, my wife had walked out to the barn during the day, wanting to swing one of the broken doors into a better position for her drawing. She told me that when she approached the barn, that it reeked of shit or something very bad, and she did not go inside to see what it was. I told her I'd take a look, which I did the following weekend. We had never seen the barn up close prior to this time period. It was only when my wife decided to draw it that we ventured out to where it was in the lot. Some of the boards on the back wall were missing or broken, as well as part of the roof being rotten, which allowed for a fair amount of light into the structure. As I entered the barn, it did in fact stink of shit or manure, and yet I could see no piles of crap or anything dead lying about the main floor. There was, however, an old timber staircase leading up to an overhang or loft that actually looked pretty sturdy, so I made my way up. Now, looking at this loft, which was about 20 feet by 40 feet, it was heaped with sticks and branches and grass in the shape of what I can only describe as being a nest of enormous scale. And there was actually several, if not more, piles of shit in various states of decay scattered around here and there, and it absolutely reeked. The indented area, if you can imagine a bird's nest, only giant-sized, was about 10 feet or more across, and well compressed, looking like something was living there to my eyes. There was some old bones lying here and there, but from what I did not know. So I climbed down, having told my wife what I had found. All that she said to me was, "That's weird." Well, as the weeks and months went by, my wife happened to draw this barn from many different perspectives, and to me seemed to be a little obsessed with the damn thing, to the point where she now had about 8 drawings of this barn. On what was another day after returning home from work, my wife said to me, "I saw something peeking out from behind the barn door today." And I said to her, "What do you mean you saw something peeking out from behind the barn door?" She said there was a large figure leaning out from behind the door, and when I fixed my eyes on it, the thing ducked back inside. I said to her, "What did it look like?" To which she said that whatever it was had to have been tall as the door, which was about 8 feet, and it was hairy. Well, I thought she had lost her rocker for sure, and that very day, about a half hour before sunset, I went out to take a look with a pitchfork in my hand. As I approached the door, I was initially making some noise in case anything was there, and when I stuck my head inside, I heard a growl that was deep and foreboding coming from the loft, and when I looked up, staring down at me were 2 large red glowing eyes, set maybe a foot apart. gives me the chills to this very day talking about it. Well, I've never ran so fast in my life to get away from that place, and having reached the house, I told my wife there was a bear out there. But believe me, this was no bear. It was a monster of epic proportions. I told Mary Ann that it would be best to stay away from the building, and that it would be best to take it down, to keep the bears from staying in there. The following week, I had a dozer operator knock the entire building down, burying the debris out in the field, and that was the end of it. Today, I firmly believe that what I had seen was a Dogman based on what I have heard since about them. But back then, if you asked me, I would have told you it was the devil himself. That's how evil and frightening this encounter was. These eyes were glowing like red flashlights, and the growl, which it made piercing my very soul like a sword, it was absolutely terrifying. And I didn't tell my wife the truth until many years had passed. We sold the house several months later. Today's second encounter. It was the time of year for our annual caribou hunt in 1989, when my hunting partner and I ventured into an area below the Kiiwetinock Ridge, alongside of the Kiiwetinock River in British Columbia. We were working the area between the river and the Mounts Marpole and Carnarvon, with Hamilton Ridge to our south. It was a crisp morning, and we were seeing some animals starting to move, with none of them being to our liking, and the distance between us and the herd was too great as well. Having seen this activity, we decided to follow in the direction of the herd, in hope of seeing more substantial animals at some point. We had made our way all the way down to where the warden's cabin was located on the southwest side of Hamilton Ridge, and were now at the point where we were sandwiched between Hamilton and Tosher Ridge, respectively. At this point, my partner and I were sitting with our bodies facing in opposite directions. I was combing Hamilton Ridge with my binoculars, and Dennis was combing the Kiiwetinock with his. We had to have been sitting there for over an hour, observing movements of a number of caribou, when Dennis said to me, "I have never seen a timber wolf that big in my entire life, and check this thing out, Harold." On his cue, I turned and began to fix my binoculars on the area in which he was pointing. At this point, the two of us were now sitting with eyes fixed on what appeared to be a wolf, what was the size of a bull elk, in fact, which was in of itself hard to digest mentally. The distance was great, but based on the size of the larger caribou which it was stalking, walking well below them, it was twice the size of the largest male, which didn't make any sense to me, and what I was seeing was impossible in the natural world. A timber wolf at this size would have been in the neighborhood of 500 pounds, which just cannot be. As I looked at it, I said, "Dennis, that must be a bear." But even as I said it, I didn't believe my own words, and the coloration wasn't right for a bear. And yet, the rump sat too high with the spine to be the profile of a wolf. I was truly puzzled. We sat watching this beast, obviously stalking this herd from the lower position of the ridge. It must have been about 20 minutes later, as we both sat watching intently, that this beast lifted off the ground with what we believed to be its front legs, which were now hanging from the body, and began to make its way up the hill towards the herd, appearing just as a hunter would, holding its rifle, trying to get closer without being seen. This thing was now walking hunched over like a man. It made its way into position behind a bush, where it once again squatted down, and was evidently watching the activity above it, as we were. The herd was lumbering along, and had to have consisted of over 50 animals or more, when suddenly, as we watched, this beast made a lightning-fast movement, closing the gap between itself and the herd, repositioning itself behind another grouping of brush just below them. A couple of the caribou seemed to be momentarily startled as they began to trot, but then all the things settled down again. Just moments later, this creature launched itself into an uphill and diagonal run, aiming toward the middle of the herd. The animals began to run, but the creature, being much faster to our eyes, closed the gap quickly and launched its body, swatting a female to the ground with what appeared to be one blow from its now extended arm. Very much like a grizzly would whack down an animal from the back in the chase. It was now on top of the caribou, thrashing at its body in a violent manner, with both of its now apparent arms. This creature, while straddling the caribou's body, had thrown so many blows in such a brief amount of time that it was inconceivable to our eyes how many had actually been thrown. This was followed by a long pause, where it just sat atop of its victim, apparently resting and eyeing its prize. Some 15 minutes later or so, this wolf-man-like beast stood to its feet and hoisted the caribou, placing it over its shoulders like a woman carrying a mink stole, and began to walk down the slope, angling to our north. It was then that I said to Dennis, "I have to see its face," and leveling my sight on the hill in front of it, I pulled the trigger, firing a single shot, the sound of which bounced back and forth between the two ridges, and it was loud. As soon as the blast occurred, the wolf-man stopped in its tracks and looked directly at us. Immediately, Dennis said to me, "Look at that sucker's head. He has a long snout and pointed ears, and it's damn half-human wolf." He was right. Its body was long and lanky, covered it what was gray hair or fur, and from our perspective, it had a long but tapered snout like a gray wolf, with what seemed to be a variety of coloration in its face. Its ears were protruding upward from its head like two small triangulars, and there was no doubt about it. And it stood there, apparently unafraid of who we were, or what we could potentially do to it, for almost 2 minutes. The creature then began to trot away, with what was some very long strides across the face of the ridge at a speed which, quite simply, a man could not achieve. All of this while shouldering what must have been 200 or 300 pounds of animal on its back. In what was a matter of only a few minutes, this wolfman had covered about a half a mile and disappeared into the timber at the base of our north. Dennis and I sat back to compare notes about what we had just seen. We had seen it on the caribou, straddling it. Its back was lean and V-shaped, appearing to be very muscular. When the arms began to thrash at the fallen caribou, they were extremely long, and the movements were performed at a speed in which, like a blur to our eyes. After having risen to its feet, it hoisted the body around its neck and shoulders like you would if you were to lift a 5-pound bag of potatoes, as if it was nothing. I think the craziest damn moment of all was when we saw it lift up from beginning on its 4 legs to 2, which was the defining moment of the sighting. This singular movement completely blew us out of the water. We both, at that point, knew that what we were seeing was something totally unique and, quite frankly, extraordinary, if not supernatural. And yet, there it was, hunting and walking, attacking a flesh and blood animal for food. It was just incredible. Today's third encounter. My wife and I, along with another couple who lived near us, made our way into the park and were staying at a lodge near Jenny Lake. Mind you, I'm 67 years old now, but at the time, all of us were in our 30s or early 40s. We had planned to take a day hike within the vicinity of Moran Canyon. Afterwards, we would take a break near the southwest corner of Jackson Lake. We had made our way north around the shore of Lee Lake, and had passed between Trapper and Bearpaw Lake. We were heading north, approaching Jackson Lake and the entrance of Moran Canyon. As we were entering the canyon, Bivouac Peak was to the north, our right-hand side, and Mount Moran was just to the south, our left. Both of these mountains are in the excess of 11,000 feet and create quite a grand entrance to the canyon. As we found ourselves well into the canyon, we were immersed in some very dense foliage on both sides of the trail. Our visibility was extremely limited, unable to see what, if anything, may be lurking alongside of us as we walked. It must have been 20 minutes walking into the canyon when my friend John said that he heard something just ahead of us and off to the right. Thank God is all that I can say for someone who has better hearing than me. I say this because no more than 30 seconds after he said that, and we had paused to listen, a huge grizzly came walking into the path just ahead of us. If we hadn't paused, we would have walked directly alongside of him. The bear stopped and stood on its hind legs, looking directly at us, and let out this fierce growl. John immediately stepped forward and was now shoulder to shoulder with me, with our wives behind us, clutching our clothes. The two of us both grabbed our bear spray and stood at the ready. The monster was now standing some 9 or 10 feet tall and was less than 50 feet away, looking directly at us. This creature's stare reminded me of looking at a blank eye of a shark that has or shows any mercy towards its victim. My heart was trembling. I would be lying to you if I said anything less than I thought someone or everyone was going to die that day. We started to back up very slowly, which may or may not have been a big mistake. As we did, the bear lowered itself to the ground and started to slowly creep towards us, swinging its head back and forth. John and I both had the cans pointed directly at this beast, preparing for the worst, when the craziest, most unexpected thing occurred. A bizarre, shrieking sound of the loudest volume that you can imagine erupted in the canyon, the sound of which I thought would have shattered my eardrum. Our wives screamed, and the bear flung its head to its right in response of this shriek. I couldn't pinpoint the direction of the howl, but the bear seemed to be able to sense exactly the direction from which the sound had come. No sooner had he turned to his right, he bolted off the side of the trail into the brush, never to be seen again. That shrieking was so loud and deep that I could actually feel the vibrations passing through my very being. The volume and intensity of it was much too high for it to have been created at a distance. Whatever this was that had roared, it was obvious to us that that enormous grizzly bear wanted nothing to do with it. I remembered that I was breathing heavily and had thought for a moment that I may have been having a heart attack. We all looked at each other, and both of our wives were in tears, trembling in fear. We decided to get while the getting was good, and started to move back out of the canyon quickly. I think it was about 10 minutes into what I will refer to as our escape that John once again heard something on our flank that seemed to be pacing us. All I could think was that the bear had come back for its meal. We're all terrified. John was at the front and I was taking up the rear as we moved as quickly as we could out of that canyon. It seemed like hours had passed, but at some point we broke out into a more opened area where we no longer were surrounded by bushes. We could now see in every direction, and there was, at least for now, nothing pursuing us. Late that afternoon, we had made it back to the lodge and sat down as a group for drinks and some food. As we rehashed yet again what had happened in the canyon, it was John's wife, Debbie, who first breached the subject of Sasquatch or a Dogman at the table. We had heard that grizzly growl at close range. Even if it had intensified, it could not have reached the decibel level of what we had heard. She was correct in saying this, for what else were we to say? If it was a Sasquatch or a Dogman, it may have very well saved us from harm or even death. It very well may have actually followed us out until we were safe. There is nothing more than I can tell, other than that which I already said. We were so afraid in the presence of that grizzly that I can't even begin to imagine how we would have felt if a Dogman or a Sasquatch were standing in front of us instead. Just a quick interjection. I don't think that whatever it was, I think it was a Dogman, but I don't think that even if it was a Squatch or a Dogman, that it made that noise to save them. It wanted those people for itself, and that's just my thought. Today's final part of the upload. It was June 13th, 2016, and I was making my way through the forest, doing a little small game hunting. I was toting my 12 gauge by my side, hoping to run across some squirrels. I must tell you, as I begin, that I spend hundreds, if not thousands, of hours in the woods. If I'm not hunting, then I am customarily out for a stroll. I'm very familiar with everything and anything that makes these woods its home, which is to say until this day. I was taking the high line, walking along the edge of a heavily wooded ravine, about 55 feet below the crest. The ravine itself descended some 200 feet or so below me. It was so heavily covered in trees and low brush from my position, it seemed virtually impassable for man or beast to navigate through. I was following a game trail that I knew would bring me out to another side, having been there before. I didn't know it then, but I do know now why suddenly I had the most unnerving feeling like I was being watched. We've all had this feeling, but this one was different. It felt in such a way that imminent danger was approaching me. That's the only way I can describe it to you. As I began to look around, trying to shake the feeling that had come over me, I suddenly noticed a patch of bright white below me in the undergrowth. It was as white as a bleached undershirt. Typically, when I am in the woods, white color is usually acquainted with a deer's tail or the breast of a hawk or an owl. But this was much brighter and too large to be any of them. As I was staring at this white color in the brush, which was easily 200 feet or more away from me, within the side of the ravine, I started to realize that there was a figure holding a white object. Its coloration somewhat blended in with the surrounding bushes. Keep in mind that at this point, I was seeing was maybe an inch tall at the distance I was looking at with the naked eye. I set my shotgun down momentarily and pulled out my field glasses to zero in on it. I now had in focus a tall wolf-like creature that was holding in its clutches a pure white cat. The creature was standing in brush up to its waist, being surrounded on both sides, and at its back with scrubby trees. It was staring directly at me, as it. I could see it clearly. Its head was that of a wolf or an Alaskan husky. The snout was long and tapered, and I could actually see its fangs protruding from its jowls. It had triangular-shaped ears that were pointed straight up, and long but muscular arms were hanging from its side. This wolf-like creature was standing perfectly still on two legs, just like a human, and was clutching a white, apparently feral cat in its hands. I could make out what were long, finger-like appendages, which were tipped with black, hawk-like talons, with the cat's spur being bloodied in several spots. This creature was staring directly at me, and I almost couldn't stand looking at it through the lenses. It was almost upsetting me in some dark and forbidding kind of way. The upper torso, which I could only plainly see, was lean and muscular, being covered with a sparse amount of fur or hair, through which I could see its skin, while the head was completely covered in fur, like that of a wolf or a type of canine. Based on the surrounding brush height throughout the ravine, I estimated its height to be maybe 7 feet, and this thing didn't so much as blink for 10 minutes or more. Suddenly the cat wriggled violently, as if, with one final grasp, it was trying to free itself from the monster's claws. I watched as the beast tightened its grasp, and the struggle was over. A took my shotgun in hand and backtracked out of the woods, the entire time feeling as though I was being followed by this beast. Having seen this wolf man, I have never returned to this area of the woods again. My feeling now is that this creature could have torn me from limb, had I had been given it the chance to. The feeling that I had while I was staring at each other down was pure unadulterated evil. This thing was a demon from the pit of hell. Well, guys, I hope you enjoyed today's upload as much as I enjoyed sharing it with you. And this month I've got a pretty good lineup. I'm hoping that the rest of the month goes as planned. I've got to call a couple of people and kind of set some stuff up. But yeah, I've got some pretty good ideas for some, not encounters, but yeah, encounters talked about, but I really want to get, like I said the other day, the truth and the scientific proof that we need to bring the truth to fruition. So with that, guys, I want to thank everybody for all of your support. It truly means the world to me. And I only wish there was a way of me repaying you guys for all the great comments and hours of listening that you guys have spent. So with that, have a great night, guys, and see ya!